Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the recent executive order immigration ban. My name is Angela Lopez, and I'm a shareholder, and I head up the immigration practice group at Cowles Thompson. I have been practicing immigration for almost 20 years exclusively. And today, presenting with me is attorney Michelle Alonso. Michelle?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And I'm a shareholder also with Cowles Thompson in the Immigration Practice Group.
Well, we want to, first of all, thank you all for joining us and being here with us, taking the time this afternoon to participate in this webinar. Our goal is that your time is well spent and the information that we're going to provide is helpful to you or to your friends or families, family members. Our presentation intends to clarify the extent of the executive order issued by the administration on April 22nd, suspending immigration, allowing you to plan and strategize your short and long-term immigration goals. Before we start, I'm just gonna go over a couple of housekeeping matters. During the presentation, we're gonna mute the phones and the communication, so you're not gonna be able to speak up, but we want you to ask questions, and we actually encourage you to ask questions. And if you see at the bottom of the screen, there's a little icon with a Q&A letters. Please go into that little icon, or don't go to the chat. The Q&A, that's the one we're gonna be monitoring, not the chat. Type your question. For confidentiality purposes, we ask you to send question anonymously, but if you don't mind people seeing your name, then go ahead and submit your question without checking that box. We will try to answer questions as the presentation goes, but certainly at the end, we're gonna have time for Q&A, and we will be able to answer any questions that you may have. Questions we're not able to answer, we'll try to send you an email later. So let's get started. Ms. Michelle?
Yes. Okay, so the executive order that we're discussing was one that was unlike, well, or like many, it was prompted by a tweet. And so everyone was in a pure panic over the contents of the tweet. But we finally got a published executive order, and so it was a lot more bark than bite. The actual title of the order is called Proclamation Suspending Entry of Immigrants Who Present Risk to the U.S. Labor Market During the Economic Recovery Following COVID-19 Outbreak. So right then and there, from the sheer title of the executive order, we know that they're looking at the U.S., they're looking at the labor market, and that is the main focus of it. So it goes into effect for our purposes, April 24th. Reality, but effective date was 11:59 p.m. on April 23rd. So it is set to be in effect for at least 60 days. Now, like all orders, they have certain benchmarks put in place. And so the first benchmark we're going to see is the 30-day benchmark. So the Department of Labor, Department of State, and Department of Homeland Security will be reviewing non-immigrant programs. So right then, and May 23rd is when we might expect to see if there's any recommendations regarding, any non-immigrant program or any other program that they want to use to stimulate U.S. employment. That'll happen then. The more important benchmark, at least the one that we've been talking about, and we're definitely going to be looking to, is the one at 50 days. Because at 30 days, and Angela and I were talking about this, it's still a little too soon to see what kind of impact there is. The 50-day marker may still be early, but at least it's a little bit more data. So June 12th is kind of a date that, I personally earmarked to pay attention to see what DHS, Department of Labor, and Department of State have. And, in those instances, we'll get an idea of whether or not we're looking at modifications to this order. Maybe a termination, this order will be ended, or if they're actually going to extend it. And that's what we're going to see, in these coming days. But the end date as of right now is June 23rd. You'll see there the order may stay in place, quote unquote, as necessary. So that is to be determined. But, and we're going to go into this in a couple of the next slides, but the focus here is suspension and limitation of entry on immigrants. Now, in our daily conversations, immigrants, we talk about all foreign nationals, whether they're here as legal permanent residents, whether they've gone through the immigration process and are U.S. naturalized citizens. They're immigrants, right? But it's a term of art. And in this particular instance, and especially as it's contemplated in this executive order, immigrant they're talking about people who want to be legal permanent residents of the United States. You're going to see, and like I said, a little bit later on, who that excludes. There's more, like I said, bark than bite to this order. And why is that? Well, we'll see that the people that are going to be affected are just those outside of the United States. So right then and there, if you're sitting and you're inside the United States and your immigration process is taking place right now, you've done a change of status, extension of status, adjustment of status, you're not impacted at all by this executive order. This executive order is going to be impacting and is impacting people outside of the United States as of that effective date. Now, who could that possibly be? The first one, the one that jumps to mind at the front of the line, is going to be parents of U.S. citizens. We have many clients and many folks, once they come over here and get established and go through the immigration process, will want to bring their older parents to come and be with them. And they're going to be probably the first ones that are impacted. Adult children of U.S. citizens that we're processing, siblings of U.S. citizens, for legal permanent residents, if you were trying to bring over your spouse or your minor children, and you're, again, outside of the United States, this is impacting you and your process. So a couple of examples. Let's say you've been waiting, your brother petitioned for you, and it's been 17 years, and now your priority date's current, and you've sent your documentation, and you're in line for your interview. Well, that interview can definitely not happen over the next 60 days because you're one of the folks that are being, that your entry is being suspended right now. If you have an approved I-140 petition and you're going through the consular processing to get your immigrant visa, that process is being suspended. Now, for employment-based, there's some exceptions. And like I said, there's more exceptions than there are people that are impacted. That's why we're hitting this slide first. Legal permanent residents are not affected generally, but you'll look down below at the bottom of the slide, there are certain legal permanent residents that might have trouble coming in because they were in the middle of processing either an advanced parole document or what they're called boarding foils or transportation letters. If you're a legal permanent resident and you're outside and you're processing any one of those three applications, that is currently suspended. And again, if you had any questions about that, please call us. It's so nuanced and so detailed, I won't spend time on the presentation on that. But generally speaking, those are the folks that are feeling the brunt of this executive order right now. And then let's go to the next slide. Okay, so who's exempt, Angela? Can you let us know?
I'm sorry, I was mute, so I'm sorry. So now we're gonna go on to who is exempt. Michelle already gave you a pretty good overview of who is affected, and mainly immigrants, people who are applying or getting the green card to come into the United States. Now, who is exempt? As you saw in her presentation, if U.S. parents, parents of U.S. citizens, adults, children, and siblings that are outside, they are affected by the order. But if they're inside of the United States, they're fine. If the priority date is current for them to apply and submit their adjustment of status petitions, then they can complete the green card process here. They can still file the petitions. There should be no issues, no problems. And when I say priority dates, I refer to adult children and siblings because parents of U.S. citizens, they're not subject to priority dates, as well as U.S. legal permanent resident spouses and minor children. If they are outside the United States, they are affected by the order, but if they are in the United States, then they can go ahead and process their petitions as long as the priority date is current in terms of applying for the adjustment of status. Obviously, spouses of U.S. citizens are exempt. You can petition, you can file your petitions, you get the green cards during these 60 days. That's not suspended. You can continue to process their petition as normal. The tricky part here is that if you are a spouse of a U.S. citizen and you are outside the United States, well, consulates are closed and embassies as well. So they're not giving interviews, they're not giving appointments. So whether or not you're affected by the suspension, you're not going to get any interviews or green cards during whatever long time it takes the embassies and consulates to reopen. Children of U.S. citizens under the age of 21 or prospective adoptees. And this is important because it's the difference between adult children and minor children. Remember, for purposes of immigration, children under 21 are considered minor children to immigrate. So U.S. citizens, minor children, and prospective adoptees. Any lawful permanent resident, and I know this one for some people might be very obvious, but believe me, a lot of people are very concerned and confused. I am a legal permanent resident. Does that affect me? What do I do? You're a legal permanent resident. You have all the rights to stay, work, and live in the United States. If your green card is about to expire, file that petition to extend it. If you are outside the United States, as soon as you can find a flight to bring you back home, come back. No one is going to close the doors on you. So you are definitely exempt. This is a very good one exemption because we do work with a lot of healthcare workers, physicians, nurses, professionals who do research, scientists. So people who are within this area of work, healthcare, and they are coming to the United States to serve the affected population or to do research or to do something related to the COVID-19 to perform work that is essential, then they are exempt from this suspension during these 60 days. Embassies are processing petitions for these individuals. And in some cases, as long as you demonstrate, and this is determined by the Department of State, which is the one that controls embassies and consulates, and the Department of Homeland Security. So as long as you have the right documentation showing that you are coming to the United States to perform services in the area of the COVID-19 situation, then you should be okay to process your immigrant petition. EB-5 immigrant investors, this is kind of obvious because if the purpose of the suspension is to reactivate the US economy, well, what better than to have all those investors coming over to the United States to bring their money and create the jobs that we so desperately need right now. So they are welcome to come when they can get their green cards, the visa stamp, and work on their business and open business to start giving jobs, because one of the conditions for that visa is to create at least 10 permanent jobs. People who further important U.S. law enforcement objectives as determined by DOS and DHHS. We know this administration has always made a point that enforcement of the law, immigration law, is important, and therefore anyone who is going to further the mission of enforcing U.S. law is welcome to the United States. Members of the U.S. Armed Forces and their spouses and children, that we don't have to say much about, that is about fair. Special immigrants in the Iraqi and Afghani translators category, people whose entry would be in the national interest determined by the Department of State or the Department of Homeland Security. And here we made a little notation because we do work with a lot of physicians and a lot of people in the EB2 employment-based second category who can process petitions in the national interest. Physicians who work in underserved areas for 5 years, they are in the national interest. They should be given their green cards as soon as possible. Also, other people, scientists or other people who are in the EB2 category, that is in the national interest for them to be in the United States doing what they do. Especially if they're working in the COVID-19, they will definitely fall into this category. People seeking asylum, refugee status, withholding of removal, or protection under the Convention Against Torture, that is more than fair. These people are already going through a very difficult situation. Why to make it worse? We included this slide because temporary visas are not mentioned, but for obvious reasons. The executive order is intended for immigrants, okay? And Michelle explained at the beginning who is an immigrant and who is not. So in immigration, you have the immigrants, green cards, and non-immigrants, temporary visas. Not necessarily workers, because there are some temporary visas that do not allow people to work. So the temporary visas we're talking about are the H's, the O's, the TNs, the F1s, L's, and there's a bunch of other temporary visas. Those visas are not affected. The difference is that if you are in the, let's talk about first, if you are in the United States, or for the people who are in the United States, and they are filing for a change of status to any of the temporary visas, or they have to extend the temporary visa, which is about to expire, they can continue to file those petitions. The Department of Immigration accepts and is processing those petitions within regular time. I mean, Michelle and I were talking about how long some of these petitions were taking before COVID. We haven't seen a big difference in terms of processing times, but it might take a little bit longer than it was taking before, because so many of the people working at the federal agencies, they're working from home, and operations were disrupted to a certain extent. They continue to operate. So temporary visas in the United States, not a problem. Change of status, extensions, and others, pretty good. Outside the United States, the executive order doesn't affect these visas, but as we explained before, consulates and embassies are closed. They closed officially in mid-March, but some
March 20th was the
official day. Yes, but some consulates and some embassies were closed before then, as early as late January. So I think that the perception for most people is that, oh my goodness, the executive order suspended all these things. What we didn't realize is that many of these things had already been suspended, because as soon as the consulates and the embassies closed, that meant visas were not being issued. People were not allowed to get visas to come into the United States. And then we had the closures of the airports and flights canceling. So for quite some time, people have not been coming to the United States as they were supposed to be coming, because they don't have the visas, they can't get a visa. And in many cases, they just can't get a flight to bring them to the United States. So this suspension is not due to the executive order, but due to the closing of the embassies for interviews and other in-person appointments. And so we wanted to bring this up to ease the tension, because we have been getting a lot of calls and emails and clients concerned about their temporary statuses, and clients who are outside kind of in line to go apply for that H-1B visa to return to the United States, or for that O visa, or for the TN. And the problem is that they're not gonna be, even if they lift the suspension today, as long as the consulates are not open, or the embassies, they won't be able to obtain that visa to come to the United States.
So there's always an implementation enforcement section in these executive orders that we've seen from the administration, but it highlights something that I think Angela and I've always emphasized. The idea is that you want to be truthful and you want to be honest. And so they have put this in here, and basically it's a statement saying that they will go through, whether it's Department of Homeland Security or Department of State, will go through procedures to make determination if they think that anyone had applied for one of these exemptions by fraud or misrepresentation. And that's important, because by stating it on here, if they were to come and find out that someone had used it to gain admission to the US, that's a priority for removals. So that individual would be at the very top of the list for being placed in removal proceedings and basically removed out of the country. So Just big scary language because it is big and scary, but if you don't engage in that sort of conduct, then you're fine, we'll be okay. But that is definitely an emphasis from this administration.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I think we can move on to the Q&A part of the presentation because of the time constraints. So we're going to try to go through a few questions as fast as we can.
I wanted, you had mentioned on the temporary visas, and I think it was when we were talking it before, to remind folks to be checking your I-94s. Yes. So please, if you're here, and Angela was explaining on that slide between your temporary non-immigrant status, if you're here on any non-immigrant status, to go to the US CBP website and check the I-94, because while your visa may be valid, you want to make sure that they got the admission period correct, and that if you have to file an extension or you have to try to get some sort of documentation in place that you are trying to stay here lawfully and within status, that you do so now rather than later. It's a little bit harder after the fact.
Correct. I have another question here, and let me read it. And I'm outside the United States. I have been trying to get an H-1B visa. I'm a physician, but I keep trying to schedule the interview, and the consulate doesn't allow me. How do I contact them? Because I'm an infectious disease physician and I'll be working on the COVID-19. So where do I contact, or how do I contact the consulate?
Okay, and we had this come up actually, so I just had looked into it. There is an official, as of March 20th, routine consular appointments and all services were canceled, right? That was the statement. But as of April 8th, there was an update for visas for medical professionals. And what it's stating is you need to contact the actual consulate directly. So I know you're saying you're trying to schedule it. It might be through the calendaring system. We don't know that people are actually checking those systems because they've reduced staff. But there's got to be, and we found a couple on a couple consular sites where there are ways for you to contact them to see if you do qualify for one of these exemptions. And as a medical professional, it sounds like you would be one of those. It's going to have to, it's not a normal process. First of all, they've never dealt with this before. So, but they do know that they have to handle it at each consulate. Each consulate already operates like a little silo separately anyways. So it's a matter of going to that website and trying to get the right people to contact. And that's where we can help too. You'd always contact us and we can help with that.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is, I have been a legal permanent resident for 5 years. I'm ready to apply for my citizenship. Can I apply during this time? Certainly, for sure, absolutely, please. We always encourage people to apply for citizenship as at the first opportunity. So yes, if you're ready, you can go ahead and file your application for citizenship. This definitely doesn't affect your legal permanent resident status or the citizenship process. The other question is, oh, okay. My mom is here on a visitor visa, and she is 75 years old. Her I-94 expires in July, but I'm not sure she's going to be able to leave the United States. What can we do?
You want me to tackle that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So here's what we're recommending. Obviously, as we get closer to June and July, decisions can be made, but to have a plan in place, we would definitely recommend that she get, if she has a chance to see someone, get a letter explaining from her doctor abroad that she shouldn't be traveling because of her delicate age. Depending on how flights are looking in July, if you don't want to put her on a flight and it's recommended by her physician, then we could seek an extension of her B2. And these are compelling circumstances. I mean, we haven't filed an application yet because no one is expiring just yet. But those are going to be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And so the recommendation is to get an extension on that B2. She has no intention to really immigrate here. She's just visiting. But her doctor says she can't board a flight. And this is very well documented. So in that case, you're just saying, I need extra time to be able to get her out of here safely. She does not want to violate the terms of her visa. And, you know, all in all, we're thinking this is compelling enough. An approval should come in and you should be fine.
Okay, good. One more question here. I am married to a U.S. citizen. We already submit the petitions. I'm waiting on my EAD. Does this affect my EAD process? It should not, no. If the petitions are already submitted, what we are seeing in practice as the Department of Immigration continues to process these petitions as usual. Actually, we have been getting approvals for EADs all throughout this time, and pretty much on the mark. The 4 to 6 months delayed in processing, they have kind of been within that time frame. So far, we have not seen a delay beyond of what is normal. That might change because again, this is something that changes on a daily basis and the agencies are not working full capacity. So the processing of the EAD might take a little bit longer, but they continue to process it as normal. So you should be getting your EAD within a reasonable time. I have one more question here, and I think we're going to be ending with that one. Anybody who didn't get an answer on their questions, we will send you an email. Definitely, we will be sharing this recording and the PowerPoint presentation so you can have it and share it with whoever you might think need it. The last question, or one of the last questions says, I have my I-140, I'm an EB2, and my priority day is July 29, 2012. Are they going to expedite priority days? Can I find my I-485 because this is an emergency and we should be able to process this faster? Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, so this was a fun one. So the visas are, there's visa numbers, and it's not a matter of moving you to priority for approval. There's a bank of numbers. These visas go through a whole mathematical equation on how they come up with them. If they don't get used, that's why we monitor the visa bulletin every month, because those dates move up. They'll sometimes what we call retrogress, or sometimes they stay the same because they're constantly calculating how many visas have been used up that are already allocated by law. So unless Congress is going to authorize additional visas or change the way visas are allocated and do away with that system, there's no expediting of visas. And I know that's hyper technical, but the idea is, could you get maybe expedited to be interviewed as a medical professional, because this is under one of those exempt categories because you are working with COVID-19 folks and helping in those mitigating efforts. Yes, there might be a way to get you to the front of the line, but if the visa is not available, you won't be granted your visa. It's just not there.
Meaning, if your priority day is not current, it's not going to happen.
Yes.
They have to give it to you, okay? So no, that's not going to change. The system is the system. It continues to be the same. Following up that question, there is someone who is asking, so what will happen with those people who priority day were current or are current, and they're not going to be able to complete the process at the consulate, and they are outside the United States? Will those visas go to waste? Will they lose the visas? Well, no. If they are already entitled to the green card because their category and the priority day is up and all they need is that interview to get the green card, whether today or tomorrow or next week or in 4 months, they reopen, that person will get the interview and come to the United States because those numbers are contemplated within the fiscal year. So when they are ready to do that, and if they know it's a matter of getting the interview, and actually we have the case where we have a bunch of interviews canceled. Mm-hmm. So we know the agencies are going to start kind of rescheduling interviews. We're seeing certain applications, like for example, employment-based adjustment of status, that since about 2 years ago, interviews were being performed before approving. We're seeing a couple of employment. We just got a couple of employment I-485 petitions approved without interview. So I think that the agencies are going to start reevaluating what cases they do necessarily have to interview. Well, for consular process, everybody has to go to an interview because there is where they do the background check, the medical exams and everything. So everybody's going to be interviewed. So if you already got your place, like your number came up, you will not lose it just because interviews were suspended and you were not able to get the visa this year, and by year I mean fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. So that should not be a problem. Just let's wait for the consulates to reopen and start doing interviews again.
Exactly.
Would you like to add anything else, Michelle? Or I think that we're going to be concluding.
No, I think that's great. And again, and you mentioned, if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us. If we didn't cover it on this presentation, I'm sure we could get it answered.
Well, thank you again for tuning in today, for watching this presentation. We hope you got the information you were looking for. We'll be sharing this information, and please stay in touch, call us, email us, let us know if you have any other questions, and give us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.